Hi, I'm Patrick Jackson. This is my Module 14 case study presentation for EDL 850. We are looking at a situation where copies of software were made illegally in order to provide students an opportunity to learn individually on classroom computers. This is happening at a school that recently established a new computer lab that was granted by the PTA. This school is in St. Regis, called the St. Regis School, which is a K-8 school with a population of 420 students. St. Regis is a small rural community that is 25 miles away from the next large town, and outside of state allocated funds, their main source of finance is through fundraising and community support. Some of the people that we are focusing on in this case are the principal, Mr. Sample. He's a third-year principal from outside the community, and so his main focus is building relationships in his building and looking to not be an outsider to the community. Some of the teachers that we see in this include second, third, and fourth grade who are referenced as receiving the illegally copied software. With the main focus on third grade, Mrs. Brandon, who is the teacher who made the report that copies were being made illegally. She's also from outside the district and recognized the copyright laws that were being broken. We also see Mrs. Lynn, the library and media specialist, who made the copies illegally, as well as Miss Evans, the PTA president, who obviously is a parent in the building and a part of the community and also helped in making those copies. Legal and ethical issues that we're dealing with is one thing we need to look at are who's being harmed in this situation. And up front, the first thing we look at is the author or the producer of the software that's being illegally copywritten. They're being hurt, obviously, because the license agreement that came with that software is not being followed. A couple other things that we need to look at as far as people being harmed in this situation would include colleague relationships at the building. The way the situation is being handled could cause some risk with the staff. We also look at the community relations and support and how it is affected by the situation. Obviously, the community being a big supporter financially for the school and providing these things is going to be looking for their resources to be utilized correctly. And it could be a major blow if not handled the right way. This action does break the U.S. Copyright Act of 1975 and a focus on the 1980 amendment, which includes the use of software. And the license agreement for that copywritten material for that software is not being followed. That agreement establishes the conditions for which the software can be used and under what terms it can be copied or reduplicated. As it was being recopied or duplicated, another thing I like to point out is the equitable access to the software that was trying to be created by the teachers who copied it for the purpose of using it in the classroom outside of the computer lab, trying to make it as equitable as possible. So they are avoiding discrimination issues when they are doing it. The exact issue I stated as a conflict in need of resolution arose when it was reported to the building leader that copies of software were made illegally following the establishment of a new computer lab and the exploration of technology as a learning tool. The facts are we have three different things we're looking at: the people, place, and program that are involved. The people that we see are the teacher, principal, parents, and community. Teachers being Mrs. Lynn, the librarian media specialist. She is the one who procured the software that went along with the computer lab. She also is the one who set up the schedule for the computer lab to be used by teachers, and the computer lab was being used effectively, and they were trying to expand without the funds to purchase more software. She took it upon herself to copy that software to give out to teachers. Ms. Brandon, a first-year teacher who reported the issue, she is from outside the district, and as a first-year teacher working with some seasoned teachers in the building, we could possibly see some small-town politics coming into play as she reports that issue and essentially is going against what some of her other colleagues are doing. We also have Mrs. Williams, the other third grade teacher, who is using that software that has been copied. The principal, Mr. Sample, as I said earlier, is from outside the district and seeking to build and keep good relationships with his staff and the community. So he's not viewed as an outsider. This is something that's happening in his third year, is going to create some issues with that. Parents, Mrs. Evans, as I referenced earlier, is the president of the PTA. The PTA votes on what they're going to spend their money on with the school, or how they're going to allocate that for different spendings, which allowed for them to get their computer lab and the software that was copied. And we also have the community, which is used for fundraisers and obviously involved in the PTA. From the text, it seemed that the PTA was supportive. If the president is backing the idea that they're making these copies, I would assume that the community is in support of utilizing their resources to the best of their abilities. Obviously not educated on what the law is exactly with duplicating the software. The place is St. Regis School, small rural community. School funding comes heavily from fundraising. And so the money that they are receiving gets allocated towards materials that they're going to need to do their jobs, which would include technology and software. The issue arose pretty much from the idea of saving money by finding a cost-efficient route by copying the software. And as I said earlier, small-town politics could play a large role in how this all turns out. But with a split group favoring the idea of copying it to save resources over those who are uncomfortable using it, could turn that decision one way over the other. The program, the school, is a K-8. With 420 students, it's small enough that they have 2 teachers per grade level. They can serve their special education students with 2 SPED teachers, one for kindergarten through 4th grade and one for 5th grade through 8th grade. I would assume it's a public school as they're receiving state allocations for funding, and so that also plays a role in what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So looking at our stakeholders who are involved in this case, the community obviously contributes to funding, helps with fundraising. Large part of a small community involved in the PTA probably has a big say in what they're doing. We see our teachers who are utilizing the illegal copied software knowingly. In some cases, may be aware of the laws, but may also not be aware of the laws that go along with copyright. Disagreement on utilizing this copyright could cause some flare-ups involving the ethics behind using it or not using it. And then we have our principal who's working on building his relationships and solving this issue. Is going to determine exactly how his relationship stands with probably the community and the staff. Obviously, he's trying to maintain a strong school, and so he seems to favor the idea of investigating what to do with the illegally copied software. Those are the 3 major stakeholders who are involved, and they may feel the damaging effects from the situation depending on their role and how it all played out. A couple things that I would like to consider is if the district leaders have an opinion on the situation, how many district leaders there are, or if they are even aware of the situation or will become aware of the situation. Does the district already have policies for managing software? And if so, how is it being communicated to staff and to other stakeholders like the community and parents? The details of the license agreement is also something I think that would need to be taken into account. After reviewing that, you could find some way in which it is possible to make copies legally. If not, you'd have to take another route in procuring those. Couple options or possible options and consequences. Option 1 would be to ignore the situation. Small town, the idea that it's going to get out and get to somebody who's actually going to do something about it is pretty small. However, what goes along with that is the chance of legal action being taken against you. By ignoring the situation, you would have to just hope that nobody let the information out and it didn't come back on you later on. Second option that I looked at was request the copies to be eliminated so that they're not being used. This way you can avoid legal action. And I think another thing that goes along with that option is what action would you take as a building leader in determining the fate of Mrs. Lynn, the librarian and media specialist who made the copies? How well was she educated on what she could and couldn't do in that situation? And what were her purposes behind it? Are they valid? The third option that I see is requesting permission for the copies from the author or developer of the softwares, and then seeing if there's a way to get those copies legally, as opposed to making copies illegally and possibly having legal consequences that come along with that. As far as consequences, a couple things to look at would be what actions to take with Miss Lynn, as I stated before. Which is cheaper, paying for the copies and getting new ones with low funds, or possibly dealing with a lawsuit, which could cost a lot more in the long run. What will acting on one of these options do to relationships in the building and in the community? How will that affect the support the community has for the school? And how will that affect, in Mr. Sample's case, how will that affect his relationship in the building as he's viewed as an outsider? And what needs to be done about the copies? What do we do with them after everything is settled and we've come to a conclusion? Evaluating the options. Option one, ignoring the situation. Ethically, it's not a good option. It puts a lot of people in a bad position. Could be viewed as the best option for the team of stakeholders involved in a small town. But again, the risk of legal action being taken against you is greater. And in the long run, financially, it could hurt more than it helps. Option two, requesting copies to be eliminated so that they're not being used. Ethically, this is probably one of the better or more responsible actions to take. I would assume that you would have to find some way to educate teachers, and in this case, Mrs. Lynn, on the potential dangers of copyright infringement and what to be aware of when you are dealing with software. And then also with that, the possible termination of Miss Lynn, that could be another option that goes along with that. And option three, requesting permission for the copies from the author or developer, or if it leads to it, purchasing more copies. Ethically, that's another strong option, but the chances of success may be a little bit smaller. With option two and option three, I think one thing that needs to be taken into account is it sounds like a lot of teachers in the building like moving forward with using technology to educate in their classrooms, and they may just be trying to jump the gun and go a little bit too fast. They may need to take time and spend a year developing policies and finding ways to educate people in the building on how to handle software usage before they jump into that. That would also give them a little bit more time to secure funds to buy more software if they feel like that's a good option. I personally think the best option to choose would be option three, requesting permission. I think that gives you a lot more options down the road. And as I said earlier, could possibly end up giving you more time to get more funding to get the software that you need to facilitate that learning. Making sure that we're moving well into this technological age and how students learn best and what is the best way to teach students. I feel like by requesting, you're avoiding legal action that could hurt your school financially. You also, again, are giving yourself more time to get funds or finding other solutions for the issue. The copies then that were made illegally, knowing what to do with those being destroyed if needed is something you can figure out after you've taken that action. How would this work best for the school? If the author accepts the request, then the materials can be used as they were intended by Mrs. Lynn and the other teachers who were requesting it. If the author doesn't accept the request, then the plan to have individual student learning in the classroom. Might have to take a step back and spend some time developing those procedures. Policies and software usage need to